Unbroken, healing through storytelling.
And welcome to Unbroken, the podcast, which is all about healing through storytelling. I am passionate about sharing other people's stories because I really believe that if somebody hears a story at the right time for them, it has the power to transform. And today my guest is Craig Stanland. But before we hear from him, let me just tell you a little bit about him. After hitting rock bottom, he was forced to make a choice: give up or rebuild. He thought he had it all until he lost sight of what's truly important and made the worst decision of his life, losing everything along the way, including his own self-worth. Through the painful, terrifying process of starting over, Craig ultimately discovered that when you have nothing, anything is possible. Today, Craig is an author, speaker, and reinvention architect. He specializes in working with people whose lives have fallen apart, helping them reinvent themselves by showing them how to rebuild their self-worth and create the extraordinary lives they've always wanted. So welcome, Craig. Nice to have you on the show. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful, Madeline. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today.
You're very welcome. So as my show is called Unbroken, Healing Through Storytelling, the first question that I always ask every guest is, what does that word unbroken mean to you?
Unbroken to me means, well, it's funny. One thing that keeps coming up is one of my favorite books that I read when I was in federal prison was Unbroken by Lauren Hildebrand. And it's just an incredible book. And I think it was such an instrumental part of me making it through my prison sentence. But when I think of the word unbroken, I think of something has happened, whether it's in our control or out of our control. And we have accepted it, we've moved on, and we've learned the lessons from it, but we're no longer negatively impacted by it. We can move forward. And that is, to me, what unbroken means.
It's fascinating. Every time I speak to someone, they always give me their definition of the word, and I just get a different take on it every time. It's brilliant. Thank you. So can we go back to what life was like before your prison sentence?
Well, you touched on it a little bit in the bio. I had, by most common metrics, I had it all. I owned 4 homes. I drove really nice cars. I wore all the nice watches. I went to the best restaurants in Manhattan and Connecticut. I was married to an incredible, amazing woman. But behind all of that, behind it all, I never felt worthy of any of it. I felt like a complete imposter. I was always in the top 3 in my company in sales. You know, I got the plaques and the awards and the trips to Hawaii and all those nice things. And every meeting, I was just waiting to be called out as a fake, as a phony, as an imposter. And I just didn't feel worthy of the job, the success. I didn't feel worthy of my wife. And it was just a very empty existence that, because of that emptiness, I was trying to fill it. And I was trying to fill it with all those nice things. So really what I was on a treadmill trying to chase the horizon. You know, you can't ever get there. You know, the cars, the watches, the dinners, they're nice in the moment, but they just do not fill that void. And I was too blind to see what I was trying to do. And it was a very empty existence.
And these feelings of self-worth, have they always been around from when you were a youngster, or is it just something that happened in your working life?
No, I was able to, through the reinvention and rebuilding process, I've gone back to my childhood and seen where it originated from. And it really came down to, and it's certainly not pointing fingers, but I just never forget coming home from school, you know, maybe first or second grade, and having a 97 on an exam. So a very good score.
Yeah.
And my father looking at it and going, "Why didn't you get 100? Why did you miss those 3 points?" Looking at the questions that I missed and then saying, "You know these, you were careless." And now all of a sudden I'm transforming that into 97's not enough. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. You need to be perfect to be worthy. You need to be perfect to be enough. And it really stemmed from there.
Yeah, and because perfect's such a weird word, isn't it? When do we know that when is it enough? There's always that pressure to be perfect. You would never be enough.
You would never be. It's impossible. I mean, Salvador Dali said, don't fear perfection, you'll never reach it.
Yeah.
And I think that's, it's just this, using that treadmill analogy again, it's being on the treadmill trying to chase the horizon. You're just never going to do it, but you feel like you're making progress because you're running like crazy, but you're going nowhere.
So can we talk about what happened at work which led you to a prison sentence?
So I was always doing very well, but the products that I was selling became more commoditized. So the margins started shrinking. So my paycheck started shrinking. And now at this point, my identity, who I am as a human being, how I show up, is so rooted in my things. And that identity is being threatened by my shrinking paychecks. And that's completely unacceptable. And I'd worked for this company for a very long time, and I started at the bottom. So I knew how every single thing worked inside and out. And I discovered an opportunity to exploit our partner's warranty policy for my financial gain. And I said, wow, I found the treasure map. I fixed it. I fixed my problem. I can do this. And I made the choice one fateful day to start the fraud that continued for about 10 months that landed me in prison.
And it was a loophole that you'd found, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, I've definitely called it a loophole. And it was just, I think, a deep understanding of how their system worked and how I could just exploit it for my financial gain. And I knew what I was doing was wrong. When I hit, my crime was a series of, it was all done through my laptop. So it was a series of hitting the enter button, clicking the mouse button. And every single time I did that, I knew it was wrong. But I was so afraid of being honest of what was really going on in my life that this seemed like a better option to ignore that voice and to move forward in the face of knowing that it was wrong.
And so eventually, 10 months after scamming them, sorry, there's no easy way to say it, they caught up with you and the FBI knocked on your door. How did it work?
Very good question. And this is actually how my book begins. The FBI did knock on the door, and they had been tracking me for quite some time, but they didn't realize that I had started a new job. I lived in Connecticut and my new job was in Manhattan. I used to work out of the house. So when they knocked on the door, they expected me to be home. But instead, I was just walking in to my brand new job. I'd been there for about 2 weeks. Our biggest competitor wooed me away with a very nice pay package. And I'm setting up my desk for the day. And I realize I have an unheard voicemail. I thought that was so strange. My phone was on me the whole time. How did I miss it? So I put it up to my ear and I listened to it, and it was the following. Mr. Stanland, this is Special Agent McTiernan with the FBI. We are at your residence and have a warrant for your arrest. You need to call us and come home immediately, or we will issue a warrant with the federal marshals.
It's a
And that is
message
how
you clearly remember well.
is a message, and that is the opening to my book. So I've written it many times, but it's just ingrained in my brain because of the emotions behind
Yeah,
that.
I was going to say, what happened in that moment when you heard that message? It must have been, I imagine, a range of emotions.
It was a complete range of emotions. One of the first things that came to me, if you recall, I just said, I knew what I was doing was wrong. My heart told me not to do it. When I got that message, my heart said, told you so. It just literally was told you so. It caught up with you. And then it was fear, and it was just terror and uncertainty and not knowing what the heck was happening at home. What was my wife dealing with? I mean, it felt as though the oxygen was sucked out of the room. I had difficulty breathing. My stomach fell to my feet. I mean, all the cliches, they all happened at once. And it was just one of the most terrifying moments of my life.
And then from then on, you rang them, or they came to your new place of work, or?
I called them immediately. Well, I had to leave the office. And then another strange thing, I listened to the message. I put the phone up to my ear, but if you had asked me, I would have sworn that it was broadcast to the entire office. It was over the speaker system, which was not true, but it was just so much embarrassment.
And the
And I had to
paranoia, yes.
paranoia and having to get out of that office. How do I get? I literally had just walked in and was just setting up my desk. How do I explain that I'm now walking out for the day? And I do that. I get in my car and I call them immediately and say, I'm coming home. And they said, you better, and we expect to see you within an hour. I said, I will be there.
And you didn't deny it. You pled guilty, didn't you, in your trial?
I did. I pled guilty very quickly. Understood. I knew I was wrong. I wanted to fight it a little bit. I will be honest. Their complaint, the criminal complaint, there were very small errors in it. And I would say to my attorney, be like, well, that's not quite right. And he's like, you're guilty. Just plead guilty.
Yeah.
You know you are.
Yes.
And I said, you're right. And it worked out much better for me that I did do it that quickly.
And what were you sentenced to?
I was sentenced to 24 months of federal prison. And
in America, does 24 months mean 24 months? Because in the UK, you can get out quicker, even though your sentence is 2 years.
Excellent question. And same here. We have good time, which is it's about 10 to 12%. So I ended up serving, it was around 21 months. I did 15 months inside actual prison, in what's called a federal prison camp here in the States. And then the other 6 months was in a halfway house in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay. And you had a hefty fine as well to pay back, didn't you? You called it restitution, I think.
Restitution of $834,000.
Wow. Wow. So you're a nice guy from Brooklyn. What was it like for you to spend time in prison? Was it what you imagined it was going to be?
Well, so that's very interesting, because when I was first arrested, I was assigned a pretrial probation officer, and she told me very specifically, she said, do not watch anything about prisons, do not research prisons, it's only going to scare you. So I listened to her. I thought she was really looking out for me. And I spent about 4 months thinking that I was going to go to a prison that we see on TV and movies. I'm all of 5'4". At the time of my arrest, I was 140 pounds. I'm not a large individual. And for 4 months, I thought that I was going to be raped and beaten every single day in prison. I thought I was going to a very hard facility. And finally, I met somebody who told me, he said, no, based on the nature of your crime, and my attorney never told me this either, he said, based on the nature of your crime, you're going to go to what's called a camp, where you'll be with other white collar offenders and nonviolent drug offenders. So that was such a relief to understand that, but it didn't really click in until I arrived at prison and I looked at my surroundings and I looked at the people, and they were so nice. They were so, they greeted me so kindly because they knew what I was going through. And I slept really well that night because I understood that I was going to be safe.
Yeah,
and
relief.
That was a huge relief.
It must be a massive relief. But even though you felt this relief, you struggled with your well-being in there, your mental health, didn't you? You reached some dark spaces.
I reached some, I can't say how grateful I am to be that I served my time in such a safe, quite frankly, pretty place. We had nice landscaping and we had deer and all sorts of animals, but the shame and that feeling of unworthiness just started consuming me. It was overwhelming how much it consumed me. And it really came to a head when my wife told me that she was leaving me. We were inside the prison visiting room. It was 3 days before Christmas, and I could just see the heartbreak in her eyes, and I could hear it in her voice. And she said, I'm leaving you. And that really put me down the spiral, because I realized how much I had hurt her.
Yeah, how long had you been together for?
We had been together at that point, it was 5 years. It was 5 years, and it was just, seeing the ripple effects of my actions consumed me by shame. And those dark places that you were talking about, I wrote something in my prison journal on New Year's Day, and I can't remember it exactly, but it basically said, I can't shake the year that 2015 is going to be the year I put a bullet in my head. And I really just saw suicide as a very viable option. And my mind conjured up a short video of what it would look like to actually kill myself with a gun. And it played that video on repeat over and over again. And it just became this circle that I couldn't get out of. And I really started thinking, how can I kill myself? My resources are very limited, but how can I end my life?
So to you, the only way out of your pain was to end your life.
It was. I really did think that. And it's very easy to look back now and understand that I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to feel that way anymore. And what a substantial difference between those two. And but at the time I couldn't fathom and I couldn't see another way to get out of that pain. I would go to sleep at night because that video was playing all day long. I would go to sleep, I'd rest my head on the pillow. And I remember just praying. And I'm not a religious person at all, but I remember praying, please make it stop. Please make it stop. Please make it fucking stop. And then sleep would just finally take over and put me out of my misery. And I was miserable every time I woke up in the morning and I saw the light of a new day.
Yeah.
I was so pissed that my dreams and my prayers didn't come true.
Yeah, so how did you turn it around? Because you did shift out of that suicidal place, didn't you?
I did. I was very, very, very fortunate that my best friend of 30 plus years emails me out of the blue. I remember it was a Wednesday. He said, hey man, can I come for a visit this weekend? I said, oh my God, yes, you can. I really need to see my friend because I couldn't share any of my suicidal thoughts. If you mentioned suicide in prison, they put you in solitary confinement. And I was already feeling so lost and alone and frightened. The idea of being isolated scared the absolute hell out of me.
It doesn't really
So I
make
could,
sense, does it? You're feeling shite already. So let's just lock you up by yourself and that will really support you, won't it? And nurture you.
it,
Yeah.
it, we could go down a complete different rabbit hole of how prison, how they handle
Yeah.
situations like that. So I
Harsh
didn't,
environment.
very harsh environment. I couldn't share on the phone because phone calls are monitored, emails are monitored. I wouldn't dare tell any of my friends inside prison, who were some of the most caring, wonderful people I've ever met. But I was worried out of their concern for me that they would mention it to a guard or a prison official. And I just bottled it up. And you said something amazing in your TED that I actually wrote down, which was, what we don't speak about leaks out of us. And I just loved that so much. And I felt that I can understand that so well. So here I am bottling it all up. Sean's coming for a visit. I'm like, visits are not monitored. I can share with him. I can tell him everything. I can't wait to tell him. It takes forever for Saturday to arrive, but it finally does. And we settle down into our seats and I'm ready to unload on him. Before I can say a word, Sean starts to speak. His life is a complete mess. He's getting a divorce. He's got money issues. He's got work issues. He has such a sadness in him that I've never seen in our 30 plus years of friendship. And it was at that moment where I realized, where I understood, I had always thought my worth and my value was tied to my things, those cars, those watches, the fancy dinners. But in that moment, I'm sitting in a prison visiting room with nothing to my name. And Sean came to see his friend. And I realized that I had value and that I had worth. And that was the day that my life really changed.
You saw the value in connection, really, didn't you?
I did. I saw the value in connection. And Sean is very close with his younger brother, who lived a few doors down and was not a 2-hour drive to prison. He could have very easily gone and spoken to his brother, could have walked 30 seconds down the road, but he took that 2-hour drive to come see me. And that really connected because to what you just said, it's our connection that we have as best friends that he wanted and needed.
Yeah, it seems like it touched your heart really though as well, didn't it?
It really did. And what I find so fascinating about that was I'm so ready to share with him, these suicidal thoughts and that I'm not in a good place. I was so excited for that. I didn't tell him. I didn't need to. It all, I don't want to say it vanished, but it became manageable.
Hmm.
And I didn't even have to share with him in that moment.
So that kind of flicked that switch that the suicidal ideation became less and less for you, really, didn't it?
So that night, I slept really well. I did not pray to die in my sleep. I woke up not feeling great, but I wasn't disappointed at the light of a new day. And that alone was enough
Yeah.
for me to really jump into the rebuilding and reinvention process.
And I know you also speak about forgiveness. I've watched your TED talk as well. How do you begin to forgive yourself?
Forgiveness was such an important part of my journey. And what I really had to do was I had to forgive myself for the choices that I made, thousands of choices, to continue and perpetuate that fraud over the course of a 10-month time period. There were a minimum of 1,000 choices made, all of them in the face of that voice telling me not to. I had to forgive myself for the choices that I made, but I could not do that. I knew I had to forgive myself, and I knew that shame was consuming me. Even after Sean's visit, I was still consumed by the shame. I just was no longer suicidal. And I understood, for me, I couldn't forgive myself until I learned to trust myself.
Yeah.
And those two ran parallel to each other. They were both, I was working on both of those at the same time, because I would say, I forgive myself, but the words would fall flat because I didn't believe in myself and I didn't trust myself. And I realized I had to build that trust up so the words didn't fall empty.
Yeah,
And
and
so there's,
you also have a great line in your TEDx, which I wrote down, which is shame is poison to self-worth and forgiveness is the antidote. Because people are drowning in shame, really, aren't they? It's such a debilitating emotion to carry around.
it is the worst emotion that we can carry around for so many reasons. You used a beautiful word. We drown in it. It is all encompassing. It covers us entirely. And one of the worst parts about shame is that shame tells you that you are all alone. You are the only person who feels the way that you feel right now. And how dare you try to express that to anybody, because you're the only one and nobody's going to understand. And it's this self-perpetuating loop of you're alone, so you can't tell anyone. It's not going to land. They're not going to understand. And it just keeps bottling up and going in that cycle. And it's just so debilitating. And forgiveness really is the antidote.
And it's about cracking that loop, though, isn't it? You know, breaking out of that shame. And for me, the only way to break out the shame is to step in the shame, to do the thing you think you can't do, which is about speaking about it.
And that is what I started realizing for me, was that self-trust and that forgiveness then led to the vulnerability, that where I got to a place where I could start sharing my story openly. And the more that I did that, the better I felt, the more I unwound that shame. Shame lives and breathes in the dark. It's that isolation. And when we start speaking openly about it, we open the door just a crack and we let a little bit of that light in, and we start diminishing the power of shame. And the more we speak about it, the wider we open that door, the more light we let in.
Absolutely.
And we really just defeat shame in that way. And what's so beautiful about that is your TEDx, for example, that you probably have received a lot of wonderful feedback of how it's impacted people. But imagine the amount of people that you don't even know, who don't send the emails, who don't send any messages, how that's impacted them, the ripple effect. Because when we're that open about something, it gives people permission to do the same. They realize that they're not alone,
Yeah.
that they don't have to keep it in. They can share, and it's safe to share.
And that's why I love the power that comes from sharing our stories, because, you know, it was somebody else speaking out that really helped me to find my voice. And I'm just standing on the shoulders of other people that were brave enough to speak out. They really gave me that courage, because it is contagious courage, isn't it?
It totally is. And courage is a muscle that can be trained.
Yeah, like the gym.
And I think that's so, just like the gym. And I think that's such an incredible thing. And I know for me, when I started realizing that I had to build that self-trust, it actually tied really nicely into going towards that vulnerability. I started making and keeping commitments to myself. And that's how I built up that self-trust. one of my commitments was conquering my biggest fear, which was public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made a commitment to go to, you probably have them over in the UK. Toastmasters is an
Yes, we
international
have
public speaking.
Toastmasters.
Yeah. And so I made a commitment to go to that meeting. I made a commitment to speak in that meeting if I was given an opportunity. And all along the way, building up that self-trust, I'm able to work through that forgiveness. And in my first Toastmaster speech, every Toastmaster gives the same first speech. It's called the Icebreaker. And you can talk about whatever you want, but that icebreaker is as it sounds. It's an introduction into you. I could have talked about my childhood. I could have talked about my love of cars, but I chose to, on that one, to dive into the deep end and told a room full of strangers that I had just gotten out of prison and that I'm a federally convicted felon, and watching their jaws drop, and that I was consumed by shame and that I was suicidal. And I sat down after I was done and felt such relief. Such relief. And I realized I faced my biggest fear and I didn't die.
That's it. That's exactly it. What was your mind like when you left prison? I take it you had this revelation in prison, but you weren't completely cured or healed by then. So how long did that process take before you realized that it's not the external things that are important, it's the internal world? It's like an inside job, really, isn't it?
It's completely an inside job. And prison was really beneficial in the sense of helping me work through that it's not the externals. You don't have a lot in prison. You're issued some clothes, you can buy some things on commissary, but you don't have a lot of possessions. And I realized I'm okay. I'm okay living in this small cube with another person with very limited possessions. And it felt so liberating and freeing. So that was where I started moving away from the externals. And when I got out of prison, I didn't have any money, so I couldn't go buy those things. And I realized I'm still okay without those things. But to your point, it was not a quick fix.
Yeah.
That inner journey, that inside job, I would say took, all told, about 4 years. And 3 of those was when I got out of prison. I put myself into a little bit of a hibernation. I lived a little bit like a monk, to the point where, my aunt would actually say, she's like, "You okay? Are you happy?" And I said, "Yes, I am." But I really was dedicated to writing the book and doing that deep inner work to get to where I am today.
And that wasn't to do with the shame from hiding away from people, or was that just you wanted to write the book, or was it a bit of both?
Extremely insightful question. A little bit from column A, a little bit from column B. Absolutely was. When I first got out of prison, I actually got into a relationship. Landed a job at a gym in New York City because there's a court order barring me from my old industry. So I landed a job there and I started dating one of the trainers, which I think was really good for me at the time. But after we broke up, that shame really kicked in and I didn't think that I could get into another relationship. So I at the time said that I was very focused on inner work, but there was that shame running on the undercurrent that was preventing me from going out and meeting new people and dating. And I made friends, but it was very difficult to make those friends and then take that leap to tell them about my past, because people would look at me, at the gym, and they would just say, something doesn't quite add up. You don't really, they're like, no offense to you or the gym, but you don't quite fit behind the front desk of a gym. What's your story?
Okay.
It's just, oh my,
They'd
oh
sussed
God.
that you'd missed legs day.
Right.
And have you picked up any of your old life, your old friends? Do you speak to your ex-wife or people, your ex-colleagues? Or is that all gone completely and you totally had to start from scratch?
It was, again, a little from column A, a little bit from column B. I haven't spoken to my ex-wife in years, and I'm not sure if we ever will speak again. I hold no ill will against her. I don't know how she feels about me, but I think we've just gone our separate ways. I still have many of my old friends don't really communicate with anybody from prison. You know, I thought that I would, but when you get out, it's kind of like, I want to leave that. I want to leave that behind.
Yeah.
And then the new friends that I've made, I can't be any more grateful for. They're just some of the most amazing people that each and every one of them alone, I look at and I say, I would not know this person had I not gone through the experience that I went through. And each and every one of them is worth that experience.
Yeah. What would you say has been your greatest learning out of all of this?
Our past cannot define us without our consent.
Yeah. And that you don't have to, you can rebuild yourself, you can reinvent yourself as you have done.
You absolutely can. And it's never too late.
Yeah.
It's never too late. I'm in my 40s, and it's, I at first I thought that was really going to be detrimental. I was like, I'm in my 40s, not that that's old, but I'm not going to be able to
It's
get
a
this
baby,
corporate.
believe me. From where I'm sitting, it is young.
It was thinking, I'm not going to be right for the corporate world. I'm not going to be able to get back into that. I'm past that quote unquote prime. And these were just limiting beliefs that I was carrying. But I realized, I don't want to go back into corporate. I was going to what was comfortable. And what I've always wanted to do was be an entrepreneur, was to be a writer, was to be a speaker, and to do all those things. And I said, well, now I have an opportunity to actually do all of those things. I can go after everything that I want because I also have nothing to lose, which is such a free and liberating place to live from.
Yeah. But is there any part of you that misses the trappings of the old lifestyle, the homes, the cars, the holidays?
There are on occasion, if I see somebody wearing one of the watches that I used to wear, I will feel a little twinge of jealousy, a little bit of, ooh, I would like to buy one of those again. That will come up. The cars is an interesting one because I've had a passion for cars ever since I was a child, and it's a genuine passion. It has nothing to do with the status of it. I would much prefer a 1960 Porsche, or something vintage, something old over new flashy things. That I will give myself the grace and permission to buy one of those because it doesn't have to do, like I said, with the trappings of it. The other thing that I on occasion miss are the fancy dinners. I do love going out for a nice dinner, and I have an amazing, wonderful friend who actually is in the epilogue of the book, who we would go out a couple times a year to really nice dinners where we would just splurge, and I would give myself that. And it's so much more special when you're doing it only a few times a year, not 5 nights a week like I was doing.
Yeah. So would you say that you are content now with where you're at and the lifestyle you have now?
I would say that I am so much more content than I have ever been. My things, these, and I love that word trappings because that really has double meanings. I was trapped by them.
Yeah.
I thought I owned them, they owned me. Now without them, I feel very free. And it's more than that. Yes, I may feel that twinge of jealousy when I see a watch that maybe I want, but I'm not owned by the desire to have that watch. I acknowledge it and move on. And that to me is freedom. And the most important thing to me now is freedom. And however I can get that and not having all those things and not being a slave to those things is freedom.
Yeah, I get a sense that the fraud kind of came from a place of insecurity, but greed and ego. And this journey that you've been on has really just dropped you into what really is important, which is connections, which is compassion, forgiveness, your self-worth, your self-belief.
It really is. And I would add to that, one of a fuel to rebuilding and reinventing was the notion, started in prison. I couldn't really put a pinpoint on it, but just the word service. I knew in prison, I said, I have something here. I have with this story and with this experience, I can be of service. Like I said, I didn't know what that looked like. Now I do. But that being of service, using this story as a tool to help others. Not everybody knows what it's like to go to prison. I'm in a very small minority. but everybody knows what it feels like to not feel worthy, to not feel enough, to feel shame. And that's where we connect. And that's why I love what you do here, is through our stories. That's how we connect. It's the emotions behind those stories. We can all relate to that.
Absolutely. Somebody reviewed the podcast show the other day and she said, whilst I might not relate to every single story, I can relate to something that everybody says. So we don't have to have the same experience, but we can relate to similar emotions or feelings or, understandings. So I thought that was a nice insight.
That's a beautiful insight.
Yeah. So you have written your book, and by the time this episode is aired, it will be published. How was it writing the book?
That was a huge part of my journey. That was such a huge part of the journey. That was one of the most cathartic and most painful things I've ever done. Took me about 6 years to actually get it to where it is now. I mean, what I realized was it's about 8 drafts. And the first draft, I love what Hemingway once said, there's nothing to writing, you just cut yourself open and bleed on the page. And I realized that first draft, I hadn't even cut the surface. I scratched the surface.
Yeah.
And so I said, the second draft, I can go deeper. Third draft, I can go deeper. Each subsequent draft, I was cutting deeper and deeper and bleeding more onto the page. And that meant reliving what it was like to get arrested by the FBI, what it was like to be sentenced to 24 months, to put myself in that courtroom so that the reader can feel what that actually feels like. And to do that, it hurt tremendously, but it was such a safe environment to relive and to work through those things that it allowed me to work on that self-trust, to work on that forgiveness, and to work on that vulnerability.
It's like removing all the veils that we wear, really, isn't it? The layers.
It is. And it was just layer after layer, going deeper and deeper till I finally said, this is it. I reached the truth.
Remind me of the title of your book.
Blank Canvas, How I Reinvented My Life After Prison.
Oh, brilliant. Because normally I'd like to read them before I interview someone, but obviously that wasn't available. So I will definitely be reading it afterwards, and we'll put the details in the show notes as well. So it really just leaves me to thank you, Craig, for coming on the show and sharing your story with us. Is there any last minute advice, any last minute tips that you would give to anyone that's struggling as well?
I would really just like to reiterate what I said before, because I think it is so important. And that is, our past cannot define us without our consent. And I really think that, to me, now thinking about Unbroken, that ties exactly to the word unbroken.
That is a fantastic place to end. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Madeline, thank you so much for having me. I loved this conversation.
Unbroken, healing through storytelling. Playing now on all the main platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher for Android, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and here. Play Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black.